Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. Do you remember what it felt like to see the glow of that blue and yellow sign from the car window? Did your heart race a little faster, even though you knew exactly what was inside? Have you ever missed something so simple, so routine, that it becomes sacred in your memory? Tonight, I want to take you back to a time when joy lived in the smallest details, when Friday night meant one thing, and one thing only: Blockbuster. Stay with me and relax to remember how it feels, to relive every detail of that magical moment, and to discover why just seeing that glowing sign could wash away the stress of the week and light up the night like a beacon of happiness. At the end of this chapter, you'll understand exactly why it felt like entering a temple of entertainment and why that feeling never really left us. The air smelled different on Friday nights. There was a kind of electricity in it, even before we pulled out of the driveway. I could feel the excitement in my chest, and it wasn't just about renting a movie. It was the ritual, the rhythm of knowing what was coming. We'd finished our chores, school was out for the weekend, and the sun had just begun to sink behind the houses. There was dinner waiting for later, maybe pizza or leftover spaghetti, but first, we had to go to Blockbuster. I remember the way the car would hum gently as we rolled down familiar roads. Sometimes I'd sit in the back seat, forehead resting against the cool window, watching the orange streetlights blur past like fireflies. My mom always played the radio, something soft, maybe the Cranberries or Gin Blossoms. The music and the movement together felt like a dream, and every few minutes I'd lift my head to check how close we were. And then, there it was. That glowing blue and yellow sign, peeking just above the tops of parked cars, humming quietly like it knew we'd been waiting all week. It was warm in a strange way, not temperature warm, but emotionally warm, like a hug from someone you didn't know you missed. As we turned into the parking lot, my heart would skip a beat. Was that normal, to get so excited just from a sign? But I know now that I wasn't alone. We all felt it. Do you remember that feeling? That sudden jolt of happiness at the sight of those glowing letters? Why did it matter so much? Because that sign meant comfort. It meant choice. It meant a night spent under a blanket with your family or friends. The room lit only by the flicker of the screen and the soft hum of a VHS tape sliding into place. That sign told us that we were about to explore worlds we'd never seen, laugh with characters we'd never forget, or cover our eyes during scenes we weren't quite ready for. Even the parking lot felt sacred. There was this sense of quiet anticipation, people moving slowly, smiling as they stepped out of their cars. Parents with kids in pajamas, teenagers in oversized flannel shirts, couples holding hands. Everyone there for the same reason. Everyone wrapped in the same comforting glow of nostalgia, even if they didn't know it yet. And once we were out of the car, the real moment began. There was always this strange little thrill in approaching the entrance. My sneakers crunching lightly on the asphalt, the automatic doors swishing open like the gates of a grand palace. The air inside smelled like plastic cases and air conditioning, with a touch of popcorn if you were lucky. The fluorescent lights were soft, but bright enough to make every color on the shelves pop. And right away, I'd look up just to make sure the sign above the new releases was still there. It always was. But what struck me most every time was that moment right before we stepped in, when I paused for just a second to soak it all in. The glow of the sign behind me, casting its color on the windows, the reflections of movies and people and light bouncing off the glass. That was the moment that felt like magic. Is it strange to say that a video store could feel magical? Maybe, but if you were there, you know what I mean. Sometimes I'd wonder how many people had walked through those doors feeling just like I did, with hope, with wonder, with the quiet belief that tonight's pick might become your new favorite movie of all time. It wasn't just about renting something to watch, it was about possibility. And now, years later, I ask myself, what happened to that feeling? Why don't we get that same rush anymore when we click through streaming apps or scroll through endless titles? Is it the touch of the cases? The weight of the plastic in your hand? Or was it something deeper? The truth is, it was all of it. It was the drive, the sign, the glow, the buzz in the air. It was the people you saw there week after week, sharing the same ritual. It was the promise of a night that felt just a little more special because you earned it. You showed up. You chose your stories carefully. You carried them home like treasure. And when you walked out of that store, movies in hand, the sign glowing behind you like a lighthouse guiding you back to comfort, you just knew that the night was going to be good. So yes, that glowing blue and yellow sign did feel like the entrance to a temple built not of stone or stained glass, but of memories, laughter, and the soft hum of a rewind button. Do I miss it? Every day. But somehow, telling these stories brings it back. For just a moment, for just long enough to remember that joy can live in the simplest of places. Stepping inside always brought with it a peculiar kind of anticipation. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't jump up and shout. It settled quietly in your chest, like the gentle thrum of music you almost didn't notice, but still made your heart tap along. The first few seconds after walking through those automatic doors were always the same. The world outside melted away. The night, the worries, the passing time, all of it paused. What took its place was color, light, possibility, and shelves upon shelves of stories. The air conditioning was always slightly too cold, and it hit your skin just enough to make your arms tingle. The walls were lined with carefully organized rows of VHS tapes, all standing proudly in their upright cardboard homes. Each one had a cover that tried to outshine the next, some dark and moody, some loud and cartoonish, some quiet and emotional, all of them calling your name. I always headed straight for the new releases first. That was the sacred corner. Everyone's eyes drifted there as soon as they walked in. We all had our favorites, our go-to picks, and every week we arrived hoping for the same miracle, that somehow, some way, the copy of the movie we wanted hadn't already been taken. Do you remember that mixture of hope and dread? That sharp inhale right before you reached out your hand? That moment where your heart whispered, "Please let it still be there"? Why did it feel like so much was riding on that one movie? Because it was more than just a movie. It was your plan for the night, your escape, your little slice of joy. And it was always a gamble. Were you early enough? Had someone else beaten you to it? Was that one empty slot on the shelf a cruel joke, or just waiting to be refilled by a kind employee wheeling out the return cart? I remember walking those aisles like they were familiar trails through a forest. My fingers would skim lightly across the edges of the cases, tracing the plastic ridges and worn corners. I knew where everything was. Comedies were near the middle, the drama section off to the right, kids' movies tucked near the back wall where they kept the TV playing previews. Horror was always a little farther away, tucked slightly out of sight with their bold titles and eerie covers. I wasn't always brave enough to walk that part alone. But the new releases section, that was the real arena, the real treasure chest. Rows of the same movie stacked in perfect lines, each with a little plastic tab sticking out if the movie was available. If the tab was gone, you could only stare at the display box, wondering who had gotten there before you. That sting of disappointment, though mild, always hit deeper than you expected. Was it a group of teenagers grabbing it for a sleepover? A couple planning their night in? A parent with a minivan full of kids hoping to avoid an argument in the living room? Whoever it was, they got there first. And yet you still looked behind the case, just in case. Just in case someone had changed their mind. When it was there, when your hand found that glorious plastic case behind the cover art, you felt a tiny surge of victory, like the universe had smiled on you, like all your timing and luck and whispered wishes had paid off. And just holding it, just feeling its weight, was enough to make your whole night feel set. Do you remember the joy of turning to your sibling or your friend and holding it up with wide eyes, waiting for them to nod? That silent agreement that this was the one, that this was worth watching, again maybe, for the 5th time. It didn't matter. If it made you laugh before, or cry, or think, or feel something more than boredom, then it deserved a place in your living room once again. And then there were the times it wasn't there. You'd scan the row, eyes darting from one box to the next, refusing to give up hope. You check again, then circle the shelves one more time, as if the tape might suddenly reappear like magic. Sometimes you'd even go up to the counter and ask the person in the blue polo shirt if they had any copies returned in the last few minutes, just in case. There was always a sense of quiet community in those aisles. You could tell who was on the same mission as you. You'd see someone pause in front of a title you were thinking about, and for a brief second, it felt like a standoff. Would they take it? Would they pick the last one? But if they moved on, you'd quietly breathe out and slip it into your hands like a prize. Do you remember how it felt to discover something new? A movie you'd never seen before? Maybe one you'd never even heard of, with cover art that pulled you in. Sometimes we took chances, based on nothing more than a tagline or a name. And those chances often became new favorites. Blockbuster taught us how to gamble with curiosity. It taught us how to follow instinct. It made movie nights feel like little adventures. I think what I miss most about those aisles is the time they gave us to wander, to think, to remember. There was no rush, no algorithm shoving a trailer into your face, no autoplay. Just you and the shelves and the freedom to choose, to hold, to read the back cover and imagine the story before you ever saw a second of it. And maybe to run into a neighbor doing the exact same thing. Friday nights in those aisles were filled with whispered debates, siblings pleading for their picks, couples negotiating choices, kids sneaking peeks at movies they weren't quite old enough for. It was noisy in a quiet way, comfortable, human. And when I finally made my pick, whether it was the same old comedy I always reach for or something entirely new, I felt a kind of peace settle in, like everything else could wait, like the weekend had officially begun. So yes, there was always a mix of anxiety and hope, the fear that someone had gotten there first, the silent prayer that your favorite movie was waiting for you, right where it always had been. But that mix made it exciting. It made it real. It made it matter. And now, all these years later, I still remember how it felt to walk those aisles. The weight of possibility in my hands. The little joys hiding behind cardboard covers. The simple magic of a good movie waiting on a shelf. And there was a scent to that place that no one could ever bottle. No candle could replicate it. No air freshener in a blue spray can ever got close. It wasn't just a smell. It was a signature, a presence, a memory soaked into the air itself. The moment those glass doors slid open and the air conditioning brushed your face, it hit you in layers. The faint chemical tang of carpet cleaner, the warm, dusty scent of old shelves, the unmistakable whisper of plastic cases, warmed by hands and lined up in tight rows. And beneath it all, the sweet, buttery trace of popcorn that someone always seemed to be eating, even though you never quite saw who. It was the scent of excitement, of safety, of weekend rituals. You couldn't describe it properly, not even now, years later. But the memory of it lives somewhere deep in the chest. It sneaks up on you sometimes, in a waiting room or an old library, and you stop mid-thought, transported instantly back to those childhood evenings. You remember the soft buzz of the overhead lights and how your sneakers would shuffle softly against the carpet. You remember the way your hand would instinctively reach for the nearest tape, even before you knew what you were looking for. I loved that carpet. It wasn't pretty. It was worn down in places, patterned in shapes that probably had a name, though I never knew what to call them. But it was soft, softer than the floors at school, softer than the ones at home even. There was something oddly comforting about how it muffled everything. Your footsteps, your parents' voices, the hum of the store. You felt like you were walking through something sacred, something made just for you. And those plastic cases, they made their own sound. When you picked one up, it creaked faintly in your hand. Sometimes the little clips on the side would rattle, or the corners would snap shut with a satisfying click when you pressed them. There was a certain weight to them too, like holding a tiny promise. Each one had passed through dozens of other hands, each with its own story, each with its own plan for movie night. And somehow, that made them feel alive. I used to run my fingers across the rows, feeling the coolness of the cases and trying to guess which one would call my name that day. There was an unspoken rule about how long you could stand in front of a section before someone else started hovering, hoping you'd move. But most of the time, people were patient. We were all in the same boat, all looking for the same thing, a story worth losing ourselves in. And the popcorn? It wasn't always there, not at every location. But when it was, you knew it from the parking lot. That buttery, almost caramelized scent that drifted just far enough outside to lure you in faster. Sometimes they had a little machine near the counter, the kind with the glass box and the metal scooper. You could hear it popping faintly in the background, like applause for your arrival. I never bought the popcorn myself. My parents said we had plenty at home, which was true. But still, that smell became part of the whole experience. It didn't need to be eaten to be enjoyed. It lived in the air, mixing with the static of 100 plastic cases and the gentle thud of returning tapes sliding into the drop slot. It was one more ingredient in a recipe that couldn't be repeated anywhere else. Even now, when I catch a faint trace of it in an unexpected place, a plastic bin in a thrift store, the synthetic tang of old electronics, the distant scent of popcorn in a mall, I stop, I close my eyes, and suddenly I'm there again, standing in the center of that glowing, humming room, surrounded by people I'll never know but always felt connected to. Because that was part of the magic too. You weren't alone. Even if you walked in by yourself, there was always someone else flipping through the same shelf, picking up the same case, reading the same tagline on the back. And for a few minutes, you existed in the same quiet universe, one where nothing mattered but which story you take home tonight. I remember how the cases always had tiny scratches on them, how the stickers on the side were slowly peeling, corners frayed from too many fingers, how sometimes the wrong movie was inside and you didn't find out until you got home and slid it into the VCR, and suddenly you were watching something entirely unexpected. That disappointment hit hard, but there was also something kind of thrilling about it, a strange little twist in your plans, a movie you never would have chosen now suddenly yours for the night. The employees behind the counter were part of that smell too, in a strange way. Their blue shirts carried it with them, their hands always touching those tapes, always restocking and rewinding and labeling. I watched them sometimes as they pulled returns from the bin, stacking them into carts with practiced ease. They were the quiet guardians of our weekends, the ones who kept the shelves full and the stories flowing. Sometimes I would wander to the video game section just for the change in scent. The cases there were sleeker, the plastic shinier. It had a sharper smell, almost like new electronics. It felt futuristic, a contrast to the dusty warmth of the VHS shelves. But even then, the air around me still held that same comforting mix of plastic, carpet, and popcorn. I didn't realize then how unique that combination was, how much it would etch itself into the folds of my memory, how scent can carry emotion, how it becomes a doorway, a time machine, a lullaby. There was something about standing in that store, holding a movie in your hands, breathing in that air, that made the world feel okay, made it feel small enough to manage, big enough to dream in. Years later, when the stores began to disappear, it was that scent I missed first. Before the signs came down, before the shelves were emptied, before the buildings turned into mattress outlets or storage units, the smell was the first to go. You walked in one day and it just wasn't there. Something was off. Something was missing. The air had gone blank. But not in my mind, not in the place where my best memories live. In that place, the air still smells like Friday night, like family, like laughter, like hope in the form of a plastic case. And always, always like popcorn. Choosing a movie wasn't just about picking something to watch. It was an act of quiet ceremony, a sacred moment that belonged entirely to you. Each step carried weight, the scanning of the shelves, the way your eyes would move from cover to cover, the tiny, nearly imperceptible pause whenever a title caught your attention. You wouldn't grab it right away. First, you let the colors and fonts speak to you. You let the memory of its trailer or a friend's vague recommendation resurface. Then, and only then, would your hand slowly reach out and lift it from its spot. Some covers were bold, practically screaming for your attention. Others were quiet and mysterious, wrapped in shadows and fonts that hinted at secrets. Horror films always had the most dramatic artwork. Blood-red letters, twisted figures, frightened faces mid-screen. Comedies leaned on color and faces, usually someone falling, someone grinning, and someone looking confused. Romance wore pastels like a promise. Action films had explosions, helicopters, men running. And the dramas, the quiet ones, always looked like they were holding something back. Those were the ones I liked best. You'd flip the case over and read the back, even if you'd read it a dozen times before. The synopses were never long, just a paragraph or two, always written in a way that made even the simplest story sound like an epic journey. Sometimes they gave away too much, and you'd quickly pull your eyes away, hoping you hadn't just spoiled the ending. Other times they were too vague, and you'd squint at the blurry screenshots, trying to figure out what kind of film it really was. And sometimes the case would be empty. That was the worst. You'd go through all the steps, your heart leaning into the choice, only to find no tape inside. Just that little white slip with a barcode mocking your hopes. Someone else had beaten you to it. Someone else had felt the same pull, maybe just moments before, and you'd have to let it go, even if it felt like a piece of your evening had just disappeared. But that was part of it too, the unpredictability, the chase, the feeling that your perfect movie was somewhere on those shelves, waiting. You had to trust your instincts. You had to listen to that little voice inside that said, pick this one. This is it. This is the one you need tonight. And once you made your decision, you carried the case like a prize, like a secret you were about to unlock. Sometimes I tried to convince myself to be practical, to choose something we could all enjoy, something my parents wouldn't roll their eyes at, something my siblings wouldn't complain about halfway through. But the heart wants what it wants, and more often than not, I found myself drifting toward the corners of the store, toward the films that no one else was looking at, the quiet stories, the odd ones, the ones with strange titles and covers that didn't quite make sense. There was one film I remember in particular. The cover was simple, just a woman looking out a window, rain blurring the glass. The synopsis barely said anything. Something about memory, about a lost letter, about waiting. I had no idea what it was really about, but something in it felt like home. I rented it 3 times before it finally disappeared from the shelves, never to return. I still don't know the name. I've searched for it online, tried to describe it to people, no one's ever recognized it. But I remember how it made me feel. I remember how I sat quietly through the credits, the remote untouched beside me. And that, I think, was the moment I realized that choosing a movie wasn't about being entertained. It was about being moved.
Some nights, we made it a group activity. Everyone picked one tape and we'd negotiate at home. Parents had veto power, of course, but there was always something delightful about seeing what everyone brought to the table. My brother usually went for cartoons or slapstick comedies. My sister liked anything with music and dancing. And me, I always searched for something I couldn't quite explain, something that felt important, even if I didn't know why. We didn't have social media back then, no curated lists, no endless scrolls of suggestions tailored to your habits. You had to trust the artwork, the title, the summary, the feeling. You judged the movie by its cover, and surprisingly, that often worked, because you weren't really judging it, you were listening, tuning into something quiet and internal, something that whispered, "I need this tonight." There was something beautiful about how physical the whole process was. The act of bending down to look at the bottom shelf, the way you'd have to lift the case out gently so as not to knock the others over, the slight resistance as you slid it from its place, the texture of the label, the way the corners of the summary card sometimes curled up from age. Every part of it added to the experience. I remember seeing kids pull cases just for the characters on the front, dinosaurs, talking dogs, fairies, and sometimes that was enough. Sometimes a smiling animal or a spaceship was all it took to make your decision. Adults weren't so different. Maybe the reasons looked more complex, but at the end of the day, we all chose with our hearts, with nostalgia, with hope, with that quiet desire to escape for 90 minutes and come back changed, if only a little. And when you finally made your choice, when you walked toward the front of the store holding your case or two, there was a quiet sense of triumph. You'd done it. You'd found your story. You'd picked your evening. The world outside didn't matter for a while. The traffic, the homework, the stress, all of it faded behind the anticipation of what you were about to see, of who you were about to become, if only for a few hours. Looking back now, I understand why it meant so much. It wasn't just the film, it was the process, the ritual, the time spent surrounded by stories you hadn't yet heard. It was the feeling of agency, of choosing something not because an algorithm offered it, but because it spoke to you in a quiet, unexpected way. I miss that, the slowness, the physicality, the intimacy of it all. There was something so human about standing between rows of plastic cases, letting your fingers do the thinking, letting your emotions guide you. In a world that now moves at lightning speed, where decisions are made with the flick of a thumb, I miss the deliberate, thoughtful pause of those Friday nights. It was the kind of heartbreak you didn't see coming. One moment, you were filled with quiet excitement, your eyes locking on the perfect movie cover displayed like a beacon. It was right there in all its laminated glory, promising the exact kind of evening you needed. The artwork glowed under the store's soft fluorescent lights, colors bold and inviting. You could already picture the opening scene, feel the remote in your hand, imagine the warmth of the couch and the darkness of the room as the story began to unfold. And then you leaned in, reached for the tape, and found nothing. Just the cover, standing alone. The hollow space behind it mocked you in a way that was strangely personal, like the movie itself had chosen someone else, like it had been waiting for you, but you were just a few minutes too late. Maybe someone had grabbed it right before you walked through the door. Maybe they had been planning to watch it all week, just like you. Maybe they didn't even appreciate it the way you would have. That part made it worse. Knowing your perfect pick might end up half-watched, forgotten, or returned unwatched because someone changed their mind. But to you, it had meant something. You stood there in that moment, frozen, hoping, double-checking. Sometimes you'd even bend your knees and glance down at the lower rows, thinking maybe, just maybe, someone put it back in the wrong place. You'd scan all the spines, looking for that same color, that same font, that same little logo in the corner.
But deep down, you knew it was gone. That space behind the cover, that cruel emptiness, said everything. It was a strange kind of sadness, one you never prepared for. It wasn't like losing something big or important. It didn't change the course of your life. But it left a mark anyway, a small, quiet bruise on the day. Because you had hoped. Because, in a way, you had already begun to believe in the story you hadn't even seen. You had already made room for it in your evening. You had already imagined how it would make you feel, what it might help you forget, or what it might help you remember. Sometimes you'd pick up the empty case anyway, just to hold it, just to pretend for a second that you had it. The plastic felt warm in your hands, familiar, comforting. You'd flip it over, read the summary again, even though you already knew it by heart. You'd study the little screenshots, trying to memorize what could have been. And then, slowly, you'd return it to its place and step back. The moment had passed. There were always other movies, other covers, other nights. But when you really wanted one specific film, no other option felt right. You could try to talk yourself into a backup, something similar, something with the same actor or the same director or the same mood. But it never quite landed the same way. Your heart had made its choice. Everything else felt like settling. Some nights, it happened more than once. You'd spot a second favorite, and again, nothing behind the cover. And then a third, and it became a quiet theme of the evening, near misses, almosts, a night of disappointments lined up like dominoes. And still, you kept looking, because hope was stubborn, because the right story might still be waiting around the corner in a section you hadn't checked yet. There was a peculiar kind of dance we all learned to do in those stores. The act of pretending it didn't matter that much. The slow exhale when a tape was missing. The half smile you'd give your sibling or friend, as if to say, no big deal, I'll just pick something else. But inside, you felt it. That small sting. That moment of being just a step too late for something you really wanted. That disappointment was quietly universal. Everyone felt it. Few admitted it. Sometimes the store would have multiple display copies. One on the shelf, another on a stand, maybe even a few stacked near the counter. It gave you hope. You'd rush over to the second display, fingers crossed, only to find it too was empty. The whole store void of the very film you would come for. And yet the covers remained like ghosts, reminders of what you couldn't have. I used to wonder why they didn't just take the display down when the last copy was rented. It seemed cruel to leave it up, knowing someone else would fall into the same trap. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it kept you looking. Maybe it kept the idea alive, like a promise that the movie would return one day, that it wasn't gone forever, that you just had to be patient, that if you kept coming back, your turn would come. And sometimes it did. A few days later, or the next weekend, you'd walk in and there it was. Not just the cover, but a tape behind it, a real copy, waiting just for you. And in that moment, the earlier disappointment faded. It didn't matter that you had missed it before. It mattered that you had it now. And the joy of finally getting that movie, after the sting of not having it, made the experience even sweeter. Like winning something, like fate had remembered you. That emotional rhythm, the highs and lows, the anticipation and the letdown, was part of what made the video store magical. It wasn't just a place to rent movies. It was a place where your feelings got involved, where your heart could be broken and mended in the span of 10 minutes, where you learned to deal with not getting what you wanted, and to still keep looking anyway. The missing tape moments taught patience. They taught you not to rush. They taught you that good things weren't always available on demand, that sometimes you had to wait, that sometimes someone else got there first. And that was okay. Life went on. You'd find something else. And maybe, just maybe, what you ended up watching would surprise you in a way the original choice never could have. But I'll never forget those empty spaces behind the covers, the way they felt so personal, so quietly disappointing. I still remember the movies I missed out on years later, not because I never got to see them, most of them I eventually did, but because of how badly I wanted them in that specific moment, that night, that mood, that version of me standing in the aisle with hope in my chest, only to feel it slide out like air from a balloon. Those were the moments that reminded you the store wasn't just shelves and tapes. It was a place of longing where timing mattered, where you learned something about what you wanted and how much it hurt when you couldn't have it. And somehow, in that quiet pain, you also found something beautiful. It always came down to one question: try something new or return to something that already held a piece of your heart. There you stood in the middle of the store, holding 2 tapes in your hands. One was a new release, the kind everyone had been talking about, the kind that had just hit shelves that week with the promise of something fresh and exciting. The other was an old favorite, something you had already watched a dozen times, but somehow it still felt like a treasure you hadn't touched in years. And for a few quiet moments, your mind wavered between the thrill of discovery and the comfort of nostalgia. There was a kind of sacred weight in that decision. It was more than just choosing a movie. It was choosing what kind of night you were going to have. A new release came with mystery. You didn't know if it would meet your expectations. It could surprise you or disappoint you. It could make you laugh or cry or regret spending your one pick on something forgettable. It carried a risk, but also the possibility of something unforgettable. Maybe it would become a new favorite. Maybe it would stay with you forever. But you wouldn't know unless you gave it that chance. On the other hand, the childhood favorite was a guarantee. You already knew every scene, every line, every little emotional beat that hit just right. You could close your eyes and picture the exact moment that gave you goosebumps, or made you tear up, or made you laugh until your stomach hurt. It was safe, it was warm, and sometimes after a long week or a tough day, that was exactly what you needed. Not something new to process, but something familiar to hold on to, like visiting an old friend, one who never let you down. It didn't help that the classics often had those faded covers, the ones that looked a little worn from being loved so many times. You'd run your fingers over the case and feel the tiny scratches, the sticker slightly peeling at the edge. It felt like a secret bond between you and the story inside. You had both been around the block. You had both grown a little older, but the connection remained untouched. You trusted that tape. You knew what it could offer. And even though you had seen it before, somehow it still had more to give. Sometimes you tried to compromise. You looked for something that was both. A newer film made by the same director as one of your childhood favorites, or a sequel to a beloved classic, hoping it would carry the same emotional magic. But it never felt quite the same. The new releases had glossy covers, loud colors, bold fonts designed to scream for your attention. The childhood favorites, though, whispered. They didn't need to shout. They just waited patiently, knowing you'd come back eventually. The longer you stood there holding both tapes, the more the dilemma deepened. You'd glance around the store, as if the answer might appear on someone else's face. Maybe someone else had already chosen the right one. Maybe they were walking away with the film you should be watching tonight. But you knew that wasn't true. This was your choice to make. It was your story to live through, your night to fill. Sometimes you tried to be practical. If it was a weekend and you had more time, you might go for the new release. You could give it your full attention, see what the hype was about. If it was a weeknight and you were tired, you'd lean toward the comfort of the familiar. But even that logic fell apart when you held that one tape from your childhood. The one that made you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a bowl of cereal. The one that brought back the smell of pancakes and the sound of rain tapping on the windows. No new release could replicate that. There was also the social factor. If you were with someone else, the pressure shifted. You might be tempted to pick the new release because you didn't want to seem predictable. You didn't want to admit you still watched the same animated film from when you were 9. But deep down, that was the movie you wanted. That was the one that would make you feel better. That was the one that would wrap around you like a blanket and remind you that not everything had to change. You learned a lot about yourself in those moments. What you valued, what you craved, what you feared. Choosing between the new and the old wasn't just a decision about entertainment. It was a reflection of where you were emotionally. Were you in the mood to explore or to return? Were you looking for surprise or for reassurance? And what did it say about you depending on what you chose? Sometimes you made the bold choice. You picked a new release, took it home with anticipation, and discovered something remarkable. A story that unfolded in ways you hadn't imagined. A performance that moved you. A soundtrack that stayed in your mind long after the credits rolled. In those moments, you felt proud of your choice. You had taken a chance and it had paid off. You added a new memory to your collection. Other times, the gamble didn't work. The film fell flat. You sat there halfway through, already regretting not going with your heart. And you promised yourself that next time, you'd trust your instincts. You'd pick the one you loved, the one that never let you down. But then, next week came, and the same debate began again. When you finally made your choice, it never felt casual. You didn't just grab a tape and walk away. You stood there one last time, looking at the one you didn't pick, almost apologizing to it. You told yourself you'd come back for it next time. And sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. But the choice stayed with you. Even now, years later, I remember those moments. I remember what I picked and what I left behind. I remember the way my fingers hesitated, the way my heart leaned one way and my mind another. I remember how it felt to carry the tape to the front counter, still wondering if I had made the right call. And I remember how, once I got home and pressed play, everything else faded. Because whether it was a brand new story or a tale I knew by heart, the magic was the same. The lights dimmed, the screen lit up, and for a little while, I was exactly where I wanted to be. I remember there was always a limit. That invisible line drawn by our parents the moment we stepped foot into the store. Only one movie. It echoed like a commandment. You heard it before your eyes even had a chance to scan the shelves. Before the smell of warm plastic and popcorn had fully settled in your memory. Before the magic began. Only one. And that was that. Or so they thought. But we had other plans. Because the art of persuasion was just as much a part of the video store ritual as the movies themselves. It started with the innocent walk through the aisles, pretending not to hear the limit as you quietly collected your options. You held one title in your hand, but your eyes were already scanning for the second. You knew exactly how to time it, how to ease into the request. Maybe your parent was in a good mood. Maybe they were feeling nostalgic too. Maybe, just maybe, tonight was the night they'd say yes. You didn't ask too soon. That was the first rule. Asking before they had even browsed the grown-up section was a rookie mistake. You waited until they were flipping a case over, reading a synopsis, or maybe chuckling at a forgotten comedy they used to love. That was your moment. You'd walk over slowly, holding both movies in your hands like offerings. You'd open with a small voice, innocent, hopeful. Can I get two? Just this once? They didn't answer right away. They never did. The hesitation was everything. It gave you time to launch your arguments. One of these is really short. This one is for later in the week. I've been doing well in school. You said maybe last time. You promised if I returned the tapes on time. Sometimes you even tried to make it seem like it was their idea. I thought you liked this one too. They always raised an eyebrow. It was part of the routine. And the truth is, sometimes they weren't even mad. Sometimes they were holding back a smile because they saw right through you. But they played along. Because this wasn't just about rules. It was about a ritual between parent and child. A quiet performance of roles that had been rehearsed 100 times. Sometimes you got lucky. Sometimes the answer came quickly. Fine, just this once. You tried not to show how excited you were. You nodded with a casual thank you, but your insides were cheering. You had done it. You had cracked the code for the night. You were walking out of there with 2 movies and a heart full of pride. Other times, the battle was longer. You'd negotiate hard. You'd offer up solutions. What if I pick one kids movie and one family movie? What if I promise to rewind them both this time? What if I don't ask for candy? You were ready with terms and conditions. You knew how to sound reasonable, even though your hands were already clutching both tapes too tightly to let go. And yes, there were times when the answer stayed firm. Only one. You had to choose. And that was a heartbreak of its own. You looked down at the two movies, both of which felt essential, both of which promised joy and comfort and excitement. And now you had to let one go. It was like choosing between two friends. You held them for a long time, as if the longer you delayed, the more likely a miracle would happen and the rule would change. Sometimes you tried to sneak it past the counter. You'd quietly place both tapes on the checkout desk and wait, pretending to be distracted by something else. You hoped your parent would be too distracted themselves, maybe talking to the clerk or answering a question. But the moment they saw both tapes, the lecture returned. We said one, not two. What did we agree on? You sighed. You put one back. And the walk to the shelf to return it felt longer than ever.
But when they did say yes, those were the nights you remembered. The two movie nights were golden. They were rare, and maybe that's why they felt so magical. You got home and placed both tapes on the table, admiring them as if they were trophies. You planned the order. Which one first? Which one saved for later? You built a whole night around them. Maybe you stayed up a little later than usual. Maybe you didn't finish the second one until the next day. But it didn't matter, because you had won. And those small victories meant everything. They made you feel seen, heard, respected. Your opinions mattered. Your passion for movies mattered. Your ability to argue, to make a case, to present yourself with logic and heart, that mattered too. It was training in disguise. Life lessons hidden in a video store. Negotiation, patience, timing, compromise, all learned between shelves of plastic cases. Parents knew this. They weren't blind to it. They understood the value of setting limits, yes, but they also understood the joy of occasionally breaking them, because those were the nights you remembered years later. Not just the movies you watched, but the moment of being told yes, the moment of feeling like anything was possible. And looking back now, it wasn't just about getting your way. It was about being part of something, sharing a space, navigating choices, making memories. Sometimes it was the quiet smile your parent gave you after finally agreeing. Sometimes it was the handshake deal you made in the aisle. Just this once, okay? Sometimes it was the feeling that they understood, even if they didn't say it out loud. Now, years later, we find ourselves making rules of our own, limits of time, budgets, priorities. But we remember what it felt like to ask for more, to believe, just for a moment, that with the right words, you could make the impossible happen. That's what those aisles taught us, that asking wasn't a weakness. It was a way to connect, to try, to dream a little bigger. And so we carry that lesson forward, into life, into love, into everything that matters. Because somewhere deep inside us, there's still a kid holding two movies, looking up with hope, asking for just one more story. The final part of the ritual came after the decision was made, after the tapes were chosen and the internal negotiations settled. It happened just before heading to the counter, that quiet little detour toward the shelf where the snacks were stacked. The microwave popcorns in shiny bags, the candy boxes lined up in neat rows, and sometimes, if you were lucky, a cooler humming nearby with soft drinks. This part wasn't about cinema anymore. It was about atmosphere, about building the perfect evening. Because Friday night wasn't just movie night, it was a holiday of its own. You walked toward the snack shelf like you were approaching treasure. Your fingers trailed along the sides of the popcorn boxes, weighing the choices. Butter, extra butter, sometimes even a movie theater flavor that in your young mind made the kitchen feel like a concession stand. You didn't think about ingredients or nutrition, you thought about the way the kernels would start to pop, one by one. That familiar rhythm growing louder, until the microwave was like a tiny celebration of what was to come. And then there was the candy. Ugh, the candy.
The colorful boxes promising sour, sweet, chewy, or crunchy sensations. It didn't matter if you had eaten dinner. It didn't matter if you had brushed your teeth just an hour before, because this was Friday. And on Fridays, the rules bent a little. Fridays made space for sugar and salt and sticky fingers. Fridays invited exception. Sometimes you didn't even need to ask. Sometimes your parent would glance at the shelf, glance back at you, and say, "Go ahead, just one." And that was enough. You didn't beg, you didn't push, you just smiled. The kind of smile that held gratitude and glee, and the unspoken understanding that this was something special. You reached out carefully, not rushing, because the moment deserved attention. You weighed your options, gummy worms or chocolate drops, hard candy or something that came with a toy inside. This was your time, your choice. You had earned it. Even the sound of the wrappers mattered. The crinkle of the popcorn bag as you opened it at home, the shake of the candy inside the box as you walked to the car. These were sounds that became part of your memory. Not the loud, booming memories, but the soft, cozy ones that stay with you forever. They stitch themselves into your senses without permission, becoming part of how you remember joy. At the counter, you laid everything down with quiet pride. Your movie or two, your snack, your candy. You stood there watching the clerk scan each item, the beeping sound punctuating your excitement. You watched your parent take out their wallet. You noticed how they always seemed slightly amused by how seriously you took all of it, as if they saw themselves in you, in that excitement, in that ritual of building a night around a few chosen items. You didn't know then that these small purchases would one day feel like gold.
The ride home was filled with anticipation. You held the tapes on your lap like sacred objects. You clutched the popcorn and candy bag like you were protecting something fragile. Sometimes you read the back of the movie box again, even though you had already memorized the synopsis. You imagined the opening scene. You imagined laughing. You imagined maybe being scared or amazed or moved. The possibilities felt endless. One movie or two plus snacks, that was everything. At home, the microwave was your signal. You heard it beep, the smell of butter filling the air, wrapping itself around your clothes, your hair, your entire being. You poured the popcorn into a bowl that suddenly felt too small. You opened your candy and placed it nearby, ready to be reached during a suspenseful moment or just before the credits rolled. You turned off the lights or dimmed them, depending on the kind of movie. You pressed play. The snack didn't last long. That was part of the tradition too. Sometimes it was gone before the opening credits ended, but you didn't mind. It wasn't about stretching it out. It was about having it there at all. The simple luxury of sitting on the carpet or the couch, your legs crossed or your feet tucked beneath you, holding that bowl, unwrapping that candy, and knowing that for the next 90 minutes, nothing else mattered. Not homework, not school, not bedtime rules. Just you and the screen and the feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be. Even now, the smell of buttered popcorn in a microwave pulls you back in time. It transports you. It brings you to a place where comfort and joy were measured in small bags and foil pouches, where candy boxes meant far more than sugar, where your parents' quiet approval felt like the world saying, "Yes, you deserve this. You deserve this night." You remember how the wrappers would pile on the coffee table, how your fingers would stick together from the sugar, how you'd lick the salt from your fingertips without thinking, too caught up in the story to care, how you'd laugh out loud or cover your eyes or whisper to the characters as if they could hear you. The snacks were part of the setting, essential props in your Friday night theater. The whole house became your cinema, your sacred space. And maybe that's why, even today, grown up and carrying responsibilities, you still find comfort in popcorn, still glance at the candy shelf in the store with a hint of nostalgia, still feel a warm tug in your chest when someone offers you a Friday night plan that includes movies and snacks, because you remember not just the taste, but the feeling,
the ritual, the way those small indulgences told you you're safe, you're home. This is your moment. And so the story continues through memory, through tradition, through the quiet joy of a bag of popcorn and a favorite film. Because some parts of childhood were never meant to disappear. They were meant to be carried with us, treasured, shared. A piece of the past that still knows how to make us smile. Oh, and there was something deeply satisfying about the moment you stepped outside. That exact second when the automatic doors of the video store slid open behind you and the cooler air of the evening wrapped around your face. In one hand, you held the plastic bag, a simple, crinkly bag with the store's logo stamped in bold, fading ink. And in that bag was everything. The tape or tapes nestled inside had a weight far greater than their physical mass. That bag wasn't just a container, it was a promise. The plastic handles bit ever so slightly into your fingers as you walked toward the car. Not enough to hurt, but just enough to make you aware of them. Just enough to remind you that you had something valuable, something earned, something exciting. The tapes inside shifted gently with every step, bumping softly against each other like secret whispers of the stories they held. You didn't have to look inside. You knew what was there. You had picked them yourself after all, after a sacred process of wandering, reading, choosing. You couldn't help but glance down at the bag as you walked, even if only briefly. Sometimes the tape covers peeked out, colorful and glossy behind the translucent plastic. You could almost see the titles glowing in the streetlight. The bag swung lightly at your side, rhythmically keeping pace with your footsteps. It felt good, right. It felt like the conclusion of one ritual and the beginning of another. The parking lot always looked different after you had your movies. Before, it was just an obstacle between you and the store. Now, it was the path back to comfort, back to blankets and bowls of popcorn, back to pillows pulled to the floor and the VCR coming to life. The world around you faded a bit as your mind drifted to what was ahead. It was all happening in your head. The previews, the FBI warning screen, the moment you'd press play and the movie would flicker to life. But even those thoughts couldn't compare to the feeling in your hand. That bag, that precious, ordinary bag. Sometimes the bag had more than just movies. Maybe candy, maybe popcorn, maybe a little receipt that you crumple up and toss on the counter at home without thinking. Never knowing that years later, you'd give anything to see that printed list again. The titles, the rental dates, the due time, all printed in ink that would fade far too fast. But for now, it was all real, all fresh, all part of your Friday. The car door creaked as it opened, and you slid in carefully, cradling the bag like it was fragile, like it could break, not physically, but emotionally, as if a sudden jolt might interrupt the magic. You'd set it gently on your lap or between the seats. The bag didn't go in the trunk. It didn't get tossed aside. It had a presence, a seat at the table, a place of honor. You looked out the window as the car pulled out of the lot. The store grew smaller behind you, glowing like a lighthouse in the night. Others were still walking in, still choosing, still hoping their favorite wasn't out of stock. But your mission was complete. You had chosen. You had succeeded. And now, the weight of the bag, that gentle pressure in your palm, was the only proof you needed that the night was yours. It was in that weight that victory lived. A small, quiet victory. No trophies, no applause. Just the quiet thud of a few VHS tapes shifting in their cases. The reward wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It whispered in the rhythm of your heart, in the way your feet tapped the floor of the car with impatient excitement, in the way you couldn't help but hold the bag just a little tighter, as if to anchor the moment. Even now, long after the stores have closed and the shelves have been dismantled, you can remember it. The weight of the bag, the anticipation it carried. You can almost feel it again if you close your eyes. The smooth plastic handle, the rectangle shapes inside pressing against each other, the slight swish sound as you walked. You remember how it made you feel full of possibility, full of joy, full of stories waiting to unfold. It didn't matter how many movies were in the bag. One was enough. 2 felt like a jackpot. And if you were lucky enough to carry 3, well, that was an event. But even a single tape was sacred. Even a single rental felt like the world was giving you permission to slow down, to pause the chaos, to curl up in your little corner of the universe and be transported. And as the streetlights passed overhead, casting golden shadows into the car, you stared at the bag resting in your lap. You knew exactly what you would do the moment you got home. You'd peel off your shoes. You'd run to the living room. You'd call dibs on the remote. You'd place the tape into the VCR and hear the soft click that meant everything was working. Everything was in motion. And then it would begin. The best part? It wasn't just about watching something. It was about feeling something. The weight of the bag didn't just represent physical mass. It represented expectation, wonder, escape, a sense of certainty in a world that was often unpredictable. It was a reminder that no matter what the week had held, whether it was long days at school, awkward moments at recess, boring lessons, or exciting ones, it all ended here, with this bag, this night. And when the credits finally rolled, and you rewound the tape with sleepy eyes, and the candy wrappers littered the table, and the popcorn was nothing but kernels at the bottom of the bowl, you felt complete, fulfilled, as if something deeply human had been honored. A ritual completed, a chapter closed. Until next time. That bag, now empty, still sat nearby, still holding the echo of its earlier promise. And in some small way, even now, you wish you could reach for it again, just once more, to feel its weight, to feel that sense of quiet victory. Because back then, a plastic bag with a few VHS tapes could hold an entire universe. And somehow, it still does. The moment you left the parking lot, the world seemed to shift in speed. The air around you buzzed with a mixture of excitement and urgency that only a child or teenager renting a VHS on a Friday evening could truly understand. The bag rested in your lap, but your mind was already far ahead, imagining the scenes that awaited, the music swelling, the characters coming to life on the grainy television screen. You wanted to get home fast, but not so fast as to lose the thrill of anticipation. The weekend stretched out ahead of you, yet you felt the invisible clock ticking relentlessly, reminding you that time was fleeting, that these precious hours would slip away if you dawdled. School was forgotten, homework was postponed, even the routine worries of daily life were pushed aside. This was your moment, and it deserved your full attention. Every step, every movement brought you closer to your sanctuary, your room or the living room floor where the magic would unfold. You pictured yourself dropping the bag gently onto the carpet, the sound of the plastic giving way, the rustling of the tape cases as you pulled them out one by one. The soft whir of the VCR loading your chosen movie would be like a starting gun, signaling the beginning of a journey into another world. Outside, the neighborhood lights blinked on as dusk deepened, but you barely noticed. Your focus was singular, sharp, like a compass needle pointed toward joy. The walk or car ride home was a ritual itself, a liminal space between everyday reality and the escape that awaited. You remembered the way your pulse quickened, the small rush of adrenaline as you pictured the popcorn bag you might open, the candy wrappers you might unwrap, the familiar couch cushions you would sink into, and the flickering screen casting shadows that danced on the walls. Time, once so slow and endless during the school week, now felt like a sprint. You could almost hear the weekend slipping past, second by second, and you were determined not to let the night slip away unspent. Because once the movie started, the world paused. The characters' stories became yours, the laughter and tears and thrills filling the room and wrapping around you like a warm blanket. And yet, beneath the excitement, there was also a comforting stillness. The world outside might spin fast, but inside, time could slow down. You held that control, if only for a few hours. You decided the story's pace, the snacks, the silence or the chatter, the light or the dark. It was your night to savor, your pocket of calm before the week began again. That VHS tape was more than plastic and tape. It was a portal, and you held the key. As you hurried home, you thought about how few moments in life felt this pure, this unfiltered. The rush wasn't just about speed. It was about holding on to something precious, a ritual of joy and escape that grounded you in a way nothing else could. The weekend might fly by, but that night, the one where you sank into the story, lost yourself in a different world, felt the weight of the bag, heard the hum of the VCR, and tasted the buttery popcorn, would stay with you forever. It was your time, your peace, your small rebellion against the passing hours. That VHS tape was more than plastic and tape. It was a portal, and you held the key. As you hurried home, you thought about how few moments in life felt this pure, this unfiltered. The rush wasn't just about speed. It was about holding on to something precious, a ritual of joy and escape that grounded you in a way nothing else could. The weekend might fly by, but that night, the one where you sank into the story, lost yourself in a different world, felt the weight of the bag, heard the hum of the VCR, and tasted the buttery popcorn, would stay with you forever. It was your time, your peace, your small rebellion against the passing hours. You knew that when the credits rolled and the tape rewound, you'd be ready to carry that feeling back into the world, at least until next Friday. And you do it all over again, because some things, like the joy of a Friday night movie, were too good to ever let go. The night was yours, and nothing could take that away.